Morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're ready to go. It's just a little bit after 11 o'clock. We just extended the time before we started just to accommodate some members that were speaking in the House today on a motion. So we're going to get started anyhow. We're pleased to begin our study on e-cigarettes, and we have our officials from Health Canada here this morning. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin. You have some prepared statements. Is everybody presenting, or is one person? Ms. Geller is going to present.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, carry on and do your opening statements, and then we'll start with questions and answers. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. My name is Hilary Geller. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Healthy Environments and Consumer Safety Branch of Health Canada. And I'm joined here today by Susie MacDonald, the Associate Director General of the Controlled Substances and Tobacco Directorate within my branch, Dr. John Patrick Stewart, Executive Medical Director within the Health Products and Food Branch, and Peter Brander, the Acting Senior Director General of the Regions and Programs Branch, where Health Canada's inspection capacity resides. Nous sommes heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui afin de...
We are pleased to be here today to discuss the issue of electronic cigarettes, or e-cigarettes.
Canada and the world have witnessed the emergence of the e-cigarette market. E-cigarettes are devices, some of which resemble conventional cigarettes, that turn a liquid into a vapor inhaled and exhaled by the user. The liquid may contain propylene glycol, glycerin, and flavors like candy, fruit, menthol, tobacco flavor, which may be sold separately from the device itself. Some liquids contain nicotine, a toxic and addictive substance, while others do not. There is a rapidly growing consumer demand for e-cigarettes. While the e-cigarette market barely registered in 2008, there are now over 450 brands on the global market. In 2013, the global e-cigarette market was worth approximately $3 billion US. Some business analysts project that e-cigarette sales in the United States may surpass those of traditional cigarettes as early as 2020. E-cigarettes are marketed, sold, and consumed as alternatives to tobacco or as smoking cessation devices. In some cases, marketing appears to be targeted at youth and young adults through the use of flavors and certain promotional techniques that glamorize their use. L'absence de données scientifiques concluantes sur les risques.
Lack of conclusive evidence. The single greatest challenge with regard to e-cigarettes is that there is a lack of conclusive scientific data on the risks and benefits of these products.
Smoking cessation. However, other studies have shown that e-cigarettes may prevent quit attempts by smokers by allowing them to satisfy their addiction in places where smoking is not permitted, such as public indoor spaces and workplaces. The health effects of long-term use and exposure to e-cigarette vapor are unknown. What is known is that nicotine is a toxic and an addictive substance. The World Health Organization has also identified the potential for fetal and adolescent nicotine exposure to have long-term consequences for brain development. E-cigarettes have caused injuries due to device or electrical malfunction, and there are documented cases of poisoning, including among children, due to ingestion or spilling of nicotine-containing liquids. Variability in the quality of products available on the market has also been observed, with some products containing nicotine while labeled as containing none. There's also a lack of evidence regarding the risk that e-cigarettes pose to the tobacco control environment, particularly where youth are concerned. There are also concerns that e-cigarette use may increase the social acceptability of smoking-like behavior or the renormalization of smoking, and whether e-cigarette use could initiate a nicotine addiction that could then lead to tobacco use. While there is a lack of evidence regarding youth e-cigarette use, we do know that youth are using these products. In a 2013 Ontario study, nearly 15% of students in grades 9 to 12 had tried e-cigarettes. We know that preventing early initiation of tobacco use is one of the most effective means of reducing tobacco use in adulthood. Cette absence de preuves sur les risques et les avantages pose un important défi pour les...
This lack of evidence on risks and benefits poses a significant challenge for regulators, as regulatory regimes are generally based on a risk-benefit profile of what is being regulated.
That youth protection is a fundamental objective, and that measures should be put in place to ensure this. However, evidence may arise that allowing adult access may have a positive impact on cessation. So an overly restrictive regulatory approach has the potential to lead to unintended consequences. Under the current legislative regime, e-cigarettes that contain nicotine and/or are marketed with a health claim, such as smoking cessation, are subject to the Food and Drugs Act. These products need to be authorized by Health Canada prior to sale based upon evidence of safety, quality and efficacy, as demonstrated by the manufacturer. To date, no e-cigarette product has been authorized under the Food and Drug Act. This means that currently the advertisement and sale of e-cigarettes, including e-liquid that contain nicotine or have health claims, are illegal and may be subject to compliance and enforcement actions. E-cigarettes that do not contain nicotine and do not have health claims are legally available without authorization by Health Canada and are subject to the Canada Consumer Product Safety Act. While these acts address human health or safety concerns, they do not prevent marketing and sales to youth. They do not address risks to the tobacco control environment, nor do they prohibit the addition of flavors that may appeal to youth. Canada's compliance and enforcement approach for e-cigarettes is led by the Regions and Programs Branch, and examples of our approach include the issuance of a compliance letter requesting that parties stop selling or advertising illegal e-cigarettes, the refusal of non-compliant commercial and personal shipments at the border, and the issuance of import alerts for repeat commercial offenders. To give you an idea of recent compliance activity, from April 1 to the end of June of this year, almost 740 commercial or personal shipments were recommended for refusal. And during the same period, our laboratories tested 91 e-cigarettes that claimed to contain no nicotine or had no nicotine information on the packaging. And of these samples, almost half actually did contain nicotine. Mr. Chair, the Government of Canada is not the only jurisdiction seized with the issue of e-cigarettes. This issue is also a concern to our provincial and territorial counterparts. In fact, there has been significant federal, provincial, and territorial collaboration over the last year, including discussions at a recent federal, provincial, territorial meeting of Ministers of Health. No province or territory has yet taken action to regulate e-cigarettes. However, Nova Scotia, Quebec, British Columbia, and Alberta have indicated plans to do so. This issue is also receiving attention internationally. In April of this year, the United States Food and Drug Administration announced a proposal to regulate e-cigarettes with nicotine but without health claims as tobacco products. Under this approach, e-cigarettes with nicotine and health claims will continue to be regulated as therapeutic products. This proposal is currently being consulted on and is not likely to result in a new regulatory framework being in place for a number of years. In March of this year, the European Union approved a revised Tobacco Products Directive, which subjects e-cigarettes containing small amounts of nicotine but without health claims to tobacco-like restrictions. E-cigarettes with higher concentrations of nicotine may be available if approved under therapeutic products frameworks. Member countries may also choose to regulate e-cigarettes with any concentration of nicotine as therapeutic products. Mr. Chair, there have also been a number of reports published on e-cigarettes. I would like to briefly mention two of those. The first is a report published by the World Health Organization in August of this year. The report noted that regulations by member states are needed to impede e-cigarette promotion, minimize potential health risks to e-cigarette users and non-users, prohibit unproven health claims, and protect existing tobacco control efforts from commercial and other vested interests of the tobacco industry. The report also recommended that legal steps should be taken to end the use of e-cigarettes indoors in public and workplaces. The second report I'll mention was also published in August of this year by the American Heart Association. The AHA offered policy recommendations for areas in need of focus, such as the inclusion of e-cigarettes in smoke-free air laws, preventing youth access, restrictions on the marketing and advertising aimed at youth, taxation of e-cigarettes at a rate high enough to discourage youth use, labeling and quality control over manufacturing, and standards for contaminants. Ensemble, ces deux rapports abordent la portée.
Together, these two reports address the scope of the challenge of the issue of e-cigarettes and provide a wide range of ideas for possible regulatory intervention.
What to do with my remarks today is to provide a high-level overview and some context on the issue of electronic cigarettes. What becomes clear when discussing this issue is that in many cases there are as many unknowns as there are knowns. The lack of evidence with regard to the dangers these devices might pose to users or bystanders, whether there are potential benefits, what impact their presence will have on tobacco control objectives, all contribute to the challenge of establishing an appropriate regulatory framework. Je vous remercie à nouveau de m'avoir permis de me...
Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss this important issue.
Questions that you and members of the committee may have. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davies, you're up for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the officials for coming today. This, of course, is our first meeting of looking at this issue, so it's kind of interesting to get an overview of what's going on. And I have to say that I've been sort of following this story, particularly in the media, because there have been quite a few news stories about the issue over the last, particularly the last year, but maybe even before that. And that you're correct that there is sort of a debate that's going on between organizations or healthcare professionals or scientists who have seemed to be taking the approach that we should be really cracking down on these e-cigarettes. And then there are others who are taking an approach that actually they could be seen as a smoking cessation tool, a sort of a harm reduction tool. So there is obviously a debate out there. The questions I've got, though, you say that basically, you know, going back as far as 2008, so say about 6 years, this has been emerging. And I'm just really, I think, a bit surprised that Health Canada hasn't taken a more proactive approach. Now, you talk about the studies and that they sort of go on both sides. But when you say that on page 3, that other studies have shown that e-cigarettes may prevent quit attempts by smokers by allowing them to satisfy their addiction in places where smoking is not permitted. And then you also raise the issue of youth. But it seems to me the obvious response is that, of course, a regulatory approach would deal with that. So it's not like it's a, you know, an unknown or something that can't be dealt with. So I've got two questions. Has Health Canada actually considered banning e-cigarettes? And if not, has Health Canada made any moves to regulate? And if so, how far down the line are you? Or are you really just letting the status quo be the status quo and focusing on your enforcement, your non-compliance elements that you noted on page, wherever it was, page 6? I just feel like it's sort of a passive response that we're getting, but this has been around for 6 years, so I assume that Health Canada is going somewhere on this, and it would be helpful to know where you're going on it and what you've done so far.
Thank you very much for the question. I propose to give part of the answer and then turn it over to my colleague Peter Brander, who can talk a little bit about our compliance and enforcement approach that we have taken over the last number of years. The challenge that we face is, as a regulator, you need to be evidence-based in terms of what you do and what your approach is. And obviously part of the evidence is the scientific work. And that scientific work has truly just been emerging over the last number of years, and it certainly hasn't caught up. I would say the prevalence of use in the market is well outpaced the state of the science. But I think it's also important to note that we do have a regulatory framework in place. We do have the Food and Drug Act. We can and we have acted, and Peter will be able to tell you a bit more of that story. We also have the consumer product safety framework. So on the issues, certainly that we've seen reports of abroad, not here. We haven't had reports here of exploding e-cigarettes, leaking cartridges, etc. We do have the regulatory authority to act. So I think it's important to understand that there is a regulatory framework that allows us to take action today, yes, but it's the touch that you want to take that relies on the science.
Before your colleague answers, I certainly understand that, that you have the authority to take a regulatory approach. But I just find it not quite credible that somehow you're waiting for this committee to do something. I mean, surely you guys must be heading one way or the other. Or is it really it's the status quo and you're just focusing on compliance?
No.
Like, where are you going on this?
Yeah, no, I certainly don't want to create the impression that we've been waiting. We've been working with our provincial and territorial counterparts for a number of years now. We have a very detailed work plan with them that involves sharing of the science, sharing of regulatory approaches, because we don't exclusively act in this domain of the provinces and territories.
So you're saying that BC, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia you mentioned.
Yeah.
So if they're heading in a direction of a regulatory approach around use, smoking inside, youth, the actual products where the nicotine is involved, so how far along are you in actually developing? So are you saying you are developing a regulatory approach?
Certainly the policy work that one has to do to propose a regulatory approach. We've been developing that in cooperation with the provinces and territories as the science evolves. And in the meantime, we've been using our existing tools.
Right. So I'm not so interested in the compliance that's going on, because I understand what you're doing there, but it's really where you're headed. So do you have a time frame? Working with the provinces and the territories, are you guys saying, well, within 6 months, within a year, within 18 months, we're going to have this policy work done and we're going to start working on a regulatory approach? I mean, you must have a game plan. And I think the committee, if we have an understanding of that, it helps us, look at where we need to go as well.
Yeah, I think what I'll mention is that at the federal, provincial, territorial health ministers meeting just last month, this was on the agenda, and certainly ministers gave direction to accelerate the cooperative approach that we have with the provinces and territories. So we're doing that. We're also informed by what the US and the EU are doing, and I think it's interesting to note that they use 3 different pieces of legislation, or the proposal is to deal with these. To deal with electronic cigarettes, depending on whether there's nicotine, depending on whether there's a health claim involved. And the reports that we're seeing both from the WHO, the American Heart Association, and others, all tend to be lining up towards recommending a similar approach.
Okay, so are you saying you have no timeline?
We don't have a specific fixed end date. No, we don't. But what I can tell you is all the work is happening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davies. Next up, 7 minutes, Mr. Reagan.
I'm sitting in today on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Hetty Fry. I don't have the medical background, of course, that she does, but I do have an interest in this issue, and I know someone who is trying to quit smoking and is using e-cigarettes in hopes that will help. What is the evidence in terms of assisting people to stop smoking actual cigarettes by using e-cigarettes?
I think, as Hillary noted earlier, the evidence is not clear on whether or not these products assist folks in quitting smoking. There's only been one randomized controlled trial done by Boland, and that indicated that the quit rates were similar to other nicotine replacement products. Now, there are a number of other studies that are ongoing, and those studies have mixed reviews around the ability of these products to help folks quit smoking. I think the second piece of information that's interesting is looking at whether or not the products, as opposed to helping folks quit, create dual use within smokers. So the idea that you'd continue to smoke a regular tobacco product and then to use e-cigarettes as a secondary mechanism. And what we do know is that quitting tobacco outright has a much better overall impact on your health than continuing even smoking some products in the long term. But the bottom line is that we do not have the evidence yet to demonstrate that these products definitively help folks quit smoking.
Just so I understand, I missed the very start, and I didn't hear about what scientific qualifications the panel that you may have, or medical, or this is the advice from the department. Can you clarify that so I understand?
Yep. So no, I'm the Associate Director General and the Controlled Substances and Tobacco Directorate. My colleague here, Dr. Patrick Stewart, might want to add a few things to that, but that's the information we have. Okay.
I guess I will maybe let you answer that, but maybe you can answer this as well. Is there any doubt in your mind that for someone who is trying to stop, that an e-cigarette is less harmful than an actual cigarette with tobacco in it? That's burning, obviously that's lit and burning, and there's smoke produced.
Okay, maybe I'll answer the first question a little bit more substantively. So, I mean, the intuitive assumption is that yes, this product may assist with smoking cessation as other nicotine replacement therapies that are out there. But the fact is that this is a novel route of administration. So the nicotine replacement therapies that are now marketed, which have provided evidence that they do have a positive impact on that and an understandable safety profile, they deliver the nicotine through a different route. So they deliver it either through the skin or through the oral mucosa. And the rate of rise of nicotine in those products is slow and predictable. And when these products were marketed, they came in with clinical studies around blood levels, around potential addiction potential of the product, as well as efficacy of treating smoking cessation. This is a new product, so it's delivering the actual nicotine into the lungs themselves. So what the cigarette does is it generates a vapor that has very, very tiny droplets that allows the nicotine to get into the pulmonary tissue. So you have some studies that have been done show that you have a much more rapid absorption of the nicotine. So you have much more of a cigarette-like effect of the nicotine coming into your bloodstream and distributing very quickly. So it more mirrors not only the craving but the reward that you get from a cigarette. The other thing is we don't know the addictive potential of this. So the concern is, yeah, intuitively it may play a role, but actually it may be as addictive, if not more addictive than cigarettes. So before we run off and plan a regulatory framework, we need to look at what the science is telling us and that we're not introducing risks we don't understand.
And would I be right to assume from your comments, from the opening comments, that the assessments that Health Canada have concluded are not studies that Health Canada itself has initiated, but they're reviews of medical studies? Is that accurate? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just so I understand, Health Canada hasn't initiated an assessment other than examining the literature and the studies?
That is correct. And just to clarify, under the Food and Drug Act and regulations, if a manufacturer of, say, an e-cigarette or any health product wants to gain market access, it's up to them to carry out the research to demonstrate that the product has efficacious effects on the disease they're trying to treat, that it also doesn't introduce unrealistic or intolerable safety issues, and that it can produce the product in predictable quality. So in getting market access in the current framework in Canada, it's up to the manufacturers to develop that evidence and bring it into the regulator. And if it's reviewed and felt to be acceptable for a proposed indication, then it will get a market authorization.
So how is Health Canada handling currently the stores that are selling e-cigarettes? On the one hand, those that contain nicotine, on the other hand, those that don't.
So since 2009, Health Canada has been very clear in advising Canadians not to purchase or use e-cigarettes. As Hilary has mentioned, their safety, quality, and efficacy remains unknown, and they may pose a health risk. Our compliance and enforcement approach for these products is complaint-driven and risk-based. It includes on-site visits, the issuing of warning letters, stop sale requests, and customer refusals and/or the seizure of products. We continue to monitor the sale of these products as well as non-compliant retail locations and websites, and we're taking actions in accordance with our compliance and enforcement approach.
Has Health Canada examined any other jurisdictions, how they're handling the issue of e-cigarettes, and if so, which ones? If the list is not too long.
So I think we noted just a bit earlier that we've been working or looking at what the U.S. in particular has been doing and what the EU has been doing. The EU did come out in March, or it came out in May, a directive around e-cigarettes, and they're looking essentially at treating e-cigarettes that have a health claim and contain nicotine as a drug. Those that do not have a health claim but contain nicotine as a tobacco product, and those with no health claim and no nicotine as a consumer product. And the U.S. is taking a very similar approach, using 3 regulatory regimes to regulate the product overall.
Thank you. My time is up, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Adams?
Chair. And so thank you very much for coming and presenting here today. Very much welcomed your comments at the start. And this may not be a fair question to put to you in your role at Health Canada. It's very true that, in fact, any product before it is approved by Health Canada would have to undertake their own scientific studies. But I'm sort of concerned more about the level of knowledge and the scientific evidence available out there, generally speaking. So on the one hand, all lay people hear that e-cigarettes may be helpful in helping people end their addiction to smoking, in that it maintains some of the physical attributes of that addiction and it allows them to wean themselves off of nicotine, much like the patch, where you would start off with perhaps a higher content of nicotine and then eventually lower the content and hopefully eliminate all nicotine that you're consuming. Others say it's quite the opposite, that maybe e-cigarettes are a gateway, that you start using e-cigarettes, perhaps just the ones with glycerin, the ones that have no nicotine, and then ramp your way up and then start a fulsome addiction to cigarette smoking. Have you at Health Canada reviewed scientific literature available, and on balance, which side do you think that the scientific literature favors?
Thank you for the question. We constantly review the scientific evidence as it comes out, and I would say that on this particular issue, there's new evidence very, very regularly that is starting to kind of suggest certain directions, but I don't think anybody would say that we have the weight of evidence yet to be conclusive on any of these key issues. But there are a few issues where it is conclusive, and the dangers of nicotine is one of them. And I'd like to turn to Dr. Stewart just for a moment to talk about nicotine and our approach to the evidence in making these kinds of decisions.
So to build on what's just been said, we've definitely been monitoring e-cigarettes, what scientific evidence is out there in the public domain, looking at it from the context of our regulatory frameworks that are available. We did put out a notice in 2009 that alerted stakeholders to the fact that we felt that this was a new drug format, in the sense it was not the same as nicotine-containing gum or lozenges or patches, that this was a novel route of administration, so that to caution Canadians about Health Canada did not really understand comprehensively the safety of this product, and to not seek it out without discussion with your health practitioner. E-cigarettes some of them contain nicotine, some of them do not. Some of them contain just propellants or things like propylene glycol. And there are some studies looking at the toxicity or the hazards associated with this, but they're certainly not comprehensive. From the regulatory point of view, if we're looking at providing access to e-cigarettes for, say, smoking cessation through the Food and Drug Act and its regulations, then we would want to see evidence of the same sort of detail that we expected with other nicotine replacement therapies when they came in, or other pharmaceutical products that do play a role in smoking cessation. So to date, we have not had that evidence presented to us, and we have not evidence comprehensive enough that we would feel comfortable that a product could be marketed in Canada with a clear claim that this plays a role in smoking cessation. The level of evidence is not comprehensive, is not population-based, it's not well designed and organized to the state that we would feel comfortable authorizing it. It may play an important role, and we're hoping we do find that, but I think our due diligence is such that we need to ensure that if anything gets a approval from Health Canada with a claim, that there's substantive evidence that supports that, and that if Canadians embark on using this product, that they know that it's going to have a positive impact and that they will not be assuming undue risk or risks that are not well characterized.
And in reviewing the scientific literature available, can you provide to us some information about the probability of addiction for e-cigarettes which contain nicotine, those that do not contain nicotine, compared to regular cigarettes?
Again, it'd be nice to say that there have been well-designed studies that demonstrate this, but to date there isn't. And if you just think about an e-cigarette for a minute, it has a liquid in it. The liquid has varying constituents. Some have nicotine in them, some have nicotine in varying concentrations. They have coils that heat this liquid up. Various products, manufactured product, will deliver different amounts. It depends on the individual, how frequently they're puffing, how much they're drawing in, and other things that come in with it. So it's not a straightforward.
What are, if I might interject, sir, what are the possible health implications from that e-liquid, whether it's ingested, inhaled, or comes in contact with skin?
Again, it depends on what it contains, and again, I don't think there's been a comprehensive evaluation of this. Certainly the paper from the WHO explored some of the concerns around hazards of it. Nicotine itself, as we mentioned earlier, is quite toxic. It, if taken in doses of significant quantity, can be fatal. As far as we know, early on, the ethylene or the propylene glycol constituents seem to be an irritant to the airways and may cause problems for asthma and other things. But again, in order to be able to say with comfort or clarity that this is an acceptable risk, we need to have properly designed studies that demonstrate efficacy as well as a well-characterized frequency of adverse events.
And some provinces have taken steps or are looking at taking steps, but in as much as cigarettes were originally regulated by many municipalities in sort of a hodgepodge system, are you aware of any municipalities that have currently taken steps to regulate e-cigarettes?
Yeah, a number of municipalities have taken action to ban e-cigarettes in places where smoking is not allowed. So anywhere where there's a smoking ban, there is now also an e-cigarette ban, and those municipalities sort of go across the country. Most recently, I think just yesterday, Saskatchewan announced two. There have been some out in British Columbia. So we're starting to see that municipalities are in fact stepping up, but just with regard to smoke-free spaces.
And so these are bans on e-cigarettes which do not contain nicotine, or only those that do contain nicotine? They're
bans on e-cigarettes overall, whether or not they contain nicotine. The outside user, and in fact sometimes even the person using the product, can't tell whether or not there's nicotine in that product. So it's a global ban.
Okay. And thank you. Do I have time?
Yeah, next up, no, sorry, your time's up there. Next up, Mr. Wilkes for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for being here today. I guess I look at it from the enforcement side and from my previous background, and I just see that we're just lacking terribly. Could you explain to me, Mr. Brander, you mentioned about warning letters and seizure actions, and I'm assuming they fall under the FDA and other regulatory bodies, but could you explain to me a little more about that? Because if we have seizure actions that are available, then that would mean to me that there are other opportunities available through Health Canada already that they've looked at, because if there's a seizure action, that means there's something wrong.
Thank you for the question. Seizure activity would take place at the border, and in the early days, there were a number of seizures that have taken place. The approach has shifted, and as we're aware of product coming across the border, it is actually not allowed to enter the country, thereby negating the need for us to seize products. The remainder of our approach is, as I mentioned earlier, complaint-based and risk-based, and this is actually, we exercise our authorities under the Food and Drug Act. So we have inspectors across the country. They examine the risk. They prioritize their activities based on the risk.
Can you define the risk for me?
The risk. So that's part of the challenge here is in looking at e-cigarettes and the science that's been, or the lack of science that's out there makes it difficult to accurately define the risk of those activities. But those inspectors work across a broad range of activities, doing inspections in areas such as pharmaceutical drugs, medical devices, biologics, radiopharmaceuticals, natural health products, including e-cigarettes. So the risk is looked across that broad spectrum of activities, and actions are determined based on that.
So of the 450 brands that were said in the initial statement on the market, how many of those are created in Canada? Do you know?
We don't have that kind of market intelligence.
So that would also mean, since we've stopped seizure, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've stopped seizure actions at the border?
As we're aware of shipments coming across the border, we work with Canada Border Services Agency to stop those shipments from entering the country.
So it would seem to me if we have 450 brands available on the market and we have a significant usage in any, I can walk into People's Drug Mart and buy it, that our seizure actions probably aren't what they should be?
We aren't aware of any e-cigarette manufacturing that happens in Canada. We certainly are aware that the vast majority of it is offshore. Initially, certainly in Asia, I think we're now seeing more happening in the United States. So the vast majority of e-cigarettes would come into this country from abroad.
Okay, I'm a little confused because it would seem to me as though Health Canada being the regulatory body that would oversee the seizure of products, probably in work with CBSA, that we have a $3 billion business with 450 brands coming into Canada, potentially coming into Canada. You or I could walk down to any store within 2 blocks of here and purchase e-cigarettes, but we have absolutely no regulatory framework to control it. What would your optimum enforcement view be within 1 year, if at all possible, irregardless of having to study things to death to try and get to a regulatory body? Where can we be in 1 year? Because we do know that e-cigarettes, some of them contain nicotine. We do know what we do with regular cigarettes with nicotine. That's pretty simple. The ones that I'm concerned about, more concerned about, are the flavored cigarettes. And there are some that are flavored to illegal substances. And I'll leave it, I can explain that to some degree later. But is it possible for a child under the age of 12 to go into any store in Canada and purchase e-cigarettes and not be stopped?
I'll take the question, I think, I'll start with the issue of the potential use of illegal substances in e-cigarettes. Yes, we're aware of that as well. And I think all I would say is that if illegal substances are used in an electronic cigarette, they remain illegal substances. And I think if we're thinking of substances that are regulated under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, that law enforcement has the authority they need to act. In terms of product coming into the country, as Peter said, the dilemma that any regulator has is you have a limited number of inspectors, you have a limited number of dollars, and you have a universe that you have to regulate with those limited number of inspectors and resources. And in the world that Health Canada regulates, electronic cigarettes certainly, and the nicotine and the flavors is part of that, but so are prescription drugs, so are medical devices, so are various other things that Peter mentioned. So when you're doing your risk-based approach, you're kind of balancing off what is the risk to the public from a bad prescription drug that's produced in a dirty facility and the harm that may cause, hypothetically, versus the hypothetical health effect of undeclared nicotine, or even more difficult to quantify, the potential to induce a young person to end up with a nicotine addiction. And that is our struggle, to be perfectly honest. And as the science develops, it will allow us to be more precise in how we make those risk trade-offs, because the product itself will be better characterized and we will be better able to quantify the risk trade-offs that we face every day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Mr. Morin. I'm sure all of our witnesses here today are quite versed in both official languages, but in case you're not, you might want to be prepared to take some French in here just now. Thank you.
Merci bien. J'apprécie beaucoup.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate the questions and answers that have been given so far on both sides. We're learning a great deal about e-cigarettes, and we're mostly learning how little we actually know. I do have questions on several areas. My colleague David talked about ablation. I'm shocked by the fact that nearly half of the samples, the 91 cigarettes that were tested, contained nicotine, despite the fact that on the packaging it was indicated that there was no nicotine in those products. Do you have more information on that? Did the e-cigarettes that did contain nicotine, and you also mentioned something about 450 brands here in Canada, was it mostly the same brands of e-cigarettes that kept containing nicotine when claiming the opposite, or generally speaking, could any of those brands contain traces of nicotine? It's a very good question. We said that there were 450 brands. There may be more, in fact. The last statistics we had showed that there were 466 brands. So that number is constantly changing. And some contain nicotine, others don't. In Canada's licit market, or legitimate market, which do not contain nicotine, we know that a majority of those products contain flavors. And we know, or aromas, and we know that most of those products are disposable. But the data we possess on the Canadian market continues to be discovered, as you said. It's largely unknown. About the question, you mentioned the 46% raised by my colleague. What was your question exactly on that? Yes, I wanted to know, out of the 91 e-cigarettes that were tested, and nearly half contained nicotine, despite the fact that the packaging claimed that it contained no nicotine. Of those 91 cigarettes, amongst those, is it usually the same companies that do such false advertising, or is this a widespread concern across all the brands? We're talking about several brands. It's not always the same company. We have samples. We collected samples from many different companies, because that is of great concern to me. Let's say several smokers decide to turn to e-cigarettes to kick the habit, but in the end, without realizing it, they are continuing to maintain their habit. And I'm also very concerned about youth dependence and youth addiction. You said 15% of the youths from grade 9 to 12 had tried e-cigarettes. That is of great concern to me. I understand that this is a partnership between the federal, provincial, and territorial governments who are trying to reduce smoking across the board. But if they are presenting e-cigarettes and e-cigars as being a sexy product to youth, who then become addicted. You also mentioned that amongst those who smoked below the age of 20, nearly 3/4 became regular smokers at one point or another in their lives. So I am concerned by this increased use of tobacco as well. At Health Canada, have you adapted your awareness campaign, your anti-smoking campaign following this discovery? Well, there are two aspects to this. First of all, we've got the awareness campaign, but we also have a regulatory approach that aims to protect youth. It's true that we don't have sufficient data to show whether or not e-cigarettes truly are a gateway for those who wish to begin smoking cigarettes, tobacco cigarettes. Now, as you indicated yourself, we can see that more and more young people are experimenting with such products. If we look at what's done abroad, and you asked the question too, we can see that the US and the European Union have proposed restrictions when it comes to selling such products to minors. So Nova Scotia is considering such a restriction as well. These are all measures that we are considering, and I think my colleague discussed the fact that the political information or political issues or policy issues rather, that we're looking at are all on the table at this time.
Thank you very much. Picking up on the theme we've been discussing here, you mentioned, of course, that Health Canada has been monitoring the scientific evidence. We've been evaluating the literature, but by Ms. Geller's admission, the rapidly expanding usage is way ahead of the scientific evidence. So when we look at some of the facts that have come forward here about the impact on children, and of the ones that you intercepted and analyzed, that many of them contain nicotine, even though they didn't say they did on the labels, that the WHO has identified a potential risk for fetal and adolescent nicotine exposure of long-term consequences for brain development. Those are things that cause me a very significant measure of concern. When we look at what you said, the study from Ontario, 15% of students 9 to 12 had tried e-cigarettes. And a Cancer Society study in Quebec that 34% of elementary and secondary students had used e-cigarettes. Seems to me this is rapidly becoming a major concern about the impact on children, a new generation of smokers being created by exposure to nicotine. So I just wanted to say, it seems to me this is a high-risk train that's roaring down the track here, and by the time the scientific literature catches up, maybe 10 years from now, it's going to be really an immense public health concern with tobacco, which has been declining, taking on a whole new manifestation here. Maybe I'd follow up with just carry it the next step and to say the other thing is, of course, is cannabis that's being used in these things. And I mean, I just did a little check online, and they're all of the use of loading. And online you can see how to load your own e-cigarettes with cannabis oils and how to prepare it in about a couple hours of creative work with the dried product. The impact of that on a new generation of young people who can smoke in front of their teachers or in front of their parents, and not because there's no smell. Actually think they're getting away with something, and we've just done a study on the harmful effects of marijuana. It seems to me that there's a real need to get ahead of this somehow. The scientific literature may catch up, but I think we have enough evidence of the harm of nicotine to maybe put some restrictions on these products much more rapidly and restrict their use to those who might benefit in cessation programs through some of the measures identified by I think it was the American Heart Association, which had some 5 policy recommendations that could be employed fairly rapidly.
We agree. we, as the American Heart Association, the WHO, and others have said, there is a need for a regulatory regime that is sufficiently broad to deal with the scientific uncertainties, which will evolve over time. You're absolutely right. So you want a regulatory regime that is broad enough and flexible enough to be responsive to the emerging science and our emerging understanding of the harms and the benefits, and one that protects youth. Youth protection is definitely foremost in our minds, and certainly was foremost in the minds of these various international studies that you've mentioned. And related to that, certainly we think it's important to have a regime that would protect the tobacco control gains that we've made in this country, and Canada does remain a world leader. It's something we certainly want to avoid, where through electronic cigarettes we see that our gains in tobacco control are eroded. So we certainly agree with what you say wholeheartedly.
Do you see, or does Health Canada see any impediment to imposing some of the things that are recommended here, like inclusion of e-cigarettes in smoke-free air laws, so having them smoked only in areas that are controlled, as we see at airports and so on, or efforts to restrict youth access by making them illegal to sell them to minors and so on, or restrictions on the marketing and advertising it's aimed at youth, and why not taxing them high enough that only an adult who legitimately was using it to break a smoking habit might have access to these things? Yeah. Do you see any impediments to imposing that kind of a regime?
In some of the areas that you mentioned, no. For instance, smoke-free spaces, as I think was discussed in response to a previous question, we are seeing municipalities act on that, and that is by and large within the jurisdiction of municipalities, except in federal workplaces, and we are seeing movement there. Some of the other areas that you mentioned, for instance, restrictions on promotion to youth, there are challenges vis-a-vis the current regulatory regimes. Under the Tobacco Act, e-cigarettes don't currently meet the definition. Therefore, the sorts of promotion regimes and restrictions and bans on sales to youth, etc., that you find in the Tobacco Act, by definition, are not applicable today to electronic cigarettes.
Okay, but
Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you, folks, for coming in today and talking to us about this issue. I think I was struck, like many of us around the table here, with the opening remarks and the challenge of reconciling the comments that we don't have enough scientific certainty to act on recommending a regulatory regime, and yet a discussion about regulatory regimes and policy recommendations that are coming out of other jurisdictions and agencies. And so there was some discussion about the policy work that's being done in the department, and I guess all my questions are going to be in an effort to reconcile those two parts of the presentation. So there's some discussion about the policy work being done in the department, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate on what that policy work is and what the policy process is that would bring us to the point where recommendations would come out of the department on this issue.
Yes, thank you for the question. The policy work is focused in a couple of areas. We are engaged in a process, obviously, of examining our current regulatory tools, the Food and Drug Act, the Tobacco Act, the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, and going through an exercise of whether our current tools, how we can use our current tools. Then the gaps in terms of how we can regulate a unique product like electronic cigarettes are emerging, and we've discussed some of those challenges today, and certainly you've seen them internationally pointed to as well, because they are unique. They are a unique product. Parts we have serious concerns about, others we're not so sure. So we are in an exercise, we're engaged in an exercise of trying to devise, we think, some sort of a unique regulatory regime that would appropriately fit the risks and the benefits and the unknowns of this new product category. And I'll just note in that regard that at the FPT Health Ministers meeting, Nova Scotia actually, and it was a very useful proposal, proposed something just like that, to devise a new regulatory regime in cooperation with the provinces and territories that would have all those fundamental characteristics of youth protection, access to adult smokers, et cetera, that we've been discussing this morning. So we are in the process of kind of working through the various options, the pros and cons, the most efficient and effective way to regulate what is a completely new product category for us.
And does the department then have the capacity to do this work in a timely way? I'm wondering how Nova Scotia gets to a unique regulatory regime, but the Department of Health doesn't.
I think very simply put, it's the difference between recommending high-level principles, which I think are relatively easy to come to, and certainly we've seen them stated in various places, and then turning that into, actual, perhaps, proposed changes to legislation or regulation, and how that would actually work, what the most efficient and effective mechanism is, the federal role versus the provincial and territorial and municipal role. So it's kind of taking it from the level of concept to something that could be proposed to work well in reality.
I presume that's not a unique policy process, though. I mean, other jurisdictions, I presume, approach these things in very similar ways.
It's not a unique policy approach. I think it's fair to say if the WHO report highlights this, they did a survey of, I think, all the member states, and the diversity in approach is striking. Some countries have banned electronic cigarettes outright. Others have no regulatory controls at all, and then there's a whole bunch in the middle. So I think it's fair to say that there is no one-size-fits-all. It really does depend on a country's unique structures, unique laws, and that country's kind of analysis of the state of the evidence and what side they come down on.
Mr. Young for 5 minutes, and that'll conclude our first hour.
So you have an addictive product, a $3 billion market that is growing quickly. You have 450 brands and growing. There are stores popping up all over the GTA to sell these devices. And you have marketing to youth with fruity flavors, obviously to create customers for life. Does all this sound familiar? Does it bring to mind any other product?
Certainly the parallels with the tobacco industry,
that's what
yes,
came to mind.
That's correct.
So I'm very concerned because what I think we're facing, what you're facing as a regulator, is a tsunami of marketing and sales and health risks and health issues. I have a bunch of questions. I'm not going to get to them all, so I'll just start at the top. What narcotics are users inhaling in these devices other than marijuana and nicotine?
We aren't aware of narcotics being used in these devices.
Okay.
We've received no reports from law enforcement on that.
Okay. Is there an issue with people sitting nearby users getting secondhand nicotine into their lungs?
Can you take
Like secondhand smoke?
I think there's certainly, the question is there. I think there's legitimate reason to suspect that the vapor contains nicotine when it's inhaled, still contains nicotine and other excipients. So I think before we say yes or no, we need to do more study. But
have you seen any studies? Do the users think these things are safe? Is that why people are using them, because they think it's a safe way to get nicotine without smoking?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I'm not sure that we have any market research on that particular question. I will note, though, that under the Canadian Tobacco Use Monitoring Survey, we have asked a series of questions around e-cigarettes and Canadian use and perceptions on it.
So you said you send letters to stop sale. I'd like to ask you, how is that working?
Well, to date, we're aware of 123 physical location and 31 websites as of August, the end of August this year, that continue to sell e-cigarettes containing nicotine despite receiving stop sale letters.
Okay, so it's not working.
We continue to monitor it, and we take a risk-based approach.
And how much product have you seized?
Product we have seized in the last 2 years. We have not seized any product. Prior to that, we have seized 4,828 e-liquid bottles and cartridges, 21 complete sets, and 71 disposable e-cigarettes, e-cigars.
So that would represent a tiny percentage of what's on the market, I would assume.
That would be a safe assumption.
Okay. Have you considered issuing any cautions to the public in newspapers, social media, posters for high schools, that kind of thing?
Health Canada has issued a warning recommending that people not use these products.
I'm talking about how warnings are issued.
How
in those
warnings?
methods like that actually reach people.
We've just, the tool that we've used to date has been the Health Canada website.
Okay. Thank you. You mentioned poisonings of children in your opening remarks. How did they occur?
We have no reported incidents of that in Canada, but we do monitor internationally, and the cases that we're aware of basically involves large refillable cartridges that contain nicotine, and the child gets their hand on a cartridge and drinks it.
It sounded, Madam Geller, in your opening statement that, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were waiting for more evidence before you enforced the Food and Drugs Act. Is that true?
No,
that
that's
right?
no,
No?
that's not the impression that we were trying to convey. We do enforce the Food and Drugs Act. The actions that Peter spoke about were under the Food and Drugs Act. It's just a question of the Food and Drug Act covers a lot more than electronic cigarettes, and where do you choose to apply your inspection resources? And that's the risk-based approach that he was referring to.
Okay. So is it your impression that e-cigarettes are selling primarily because people want nicotine in their systems?
So I'm not sure that we have a response to that, but again, I'll just go back to the fact that we do have some data that we're expecting to release early in the new year, where we did ask a series of questions around e-cigarettes, including how difficult it would be to get the substances and whether or not people think they're harming themselves by using the products. So we will have more information available to us in the near future.
Thank you. Paige, we're out of time. Thank you, Chair.
I'd like to thank our guests today for appearing, and thank you for your answers. I'd like to thank our members for the good questions that they asked. We're going to suspend the meeting for a few minutes, and we'll go into camera and discuss some committee business. Thank you very much, and we'll suspend.